Hello everybody. So I'm watching The Flash for the very first time and I've made it to season 5, so today I'm going to talk about it. Let's go. So pretty much I've heard that a lot of people hate this season of The Flash, and kind of similar to last season, I did notice a bit of a downgrade. I did notice kind of like, there were a few more episodes than there have been that were just kind of like, this isn't that good. But overall, I don't think this season was terrible. I think there was a lot of good stuff in it. And maybe, like, as somebody who is watching this like after the fact, like watching this with like the whole season being done, being able to like binge watch through the entire thing, I'd probably have a bit more of a different perspective on it than somebody who had to wait week by week. If you're watching week by week and there's an episode that you only liked half of, you only liked 20 minutes of Flash for that week. But for me, I watch like 3 episodes a day, which adds up to like 2 hours. And so, for me, if I only liked half of that 2 hours, that's 1 hour. That is already more than an episode that I enjoyed. So, I think that's probably where I have a bit of a different perspective on it. Why I'm able to enjoy it more. So, so probably if I watch this week by week, I may have a different perspective on this, but being able to binge watch it, it's easier for me to accept, like, this episode wasn't the greatest, but I could just go on to the next one, and that one was good. So, but for me, I really enjoyed this season. I don't think it's as bad as some people say, but that could also just be because I was able to binge watch it, whereas others had to wait week by week. But to jump into the season, so obviously last season ended. The big moment at the end was this girl comes in and says her name is Nora West Allen, and she is the daughter of Barry and Iris. And she came from the future, and she's stuck in the present. And so she obviously becomes a big part of this season, and I think I like this new dynamic of having her on the team and, Barry and Iris having to, just be thrusted into this, having a child that is an adult, and they're like, they skip right over 20 years of raising a child, and she's just an adult. And so I thought that was an interesting dynamic, having them like this like weird situation where like they're a family, but like, they never actually had a kid. This is the kid from the future, and they're still acting like a family. I thought that was really cool and interesting new dynamic. I think both Arrow and Flash have figured out cool ways to like kind of jump to the interesting stuff of our characters having children, because obviously on Arrow, with the whole thing with William, we don't have to wait for, Felicity to be pregnant and, giving birth, and then they're having a baby and stuff. Like, they could just jump right to William's 10 years old. And we're just seeing that because, obviously, Oliver had a kid he didn't know about before the show even started, before the 5 years that he was on the island even started. He got some girl pregnant, and they had a kid, and so, we could kind of jump right to Oliver has a kid that he has to take care of, and we don't have to deal with, them having a baby and have to wait, 10 years for you to get some interesting stuff with the interactions with their kid. So I think both shows have found ways to jump to the interesting stuff of the, of our heroes interacting with their children, and not having to go through, them growing up and stuff. So, yeah, I thought that was cool. I like the new dynamic there, and finding out that Barry disappears and doesn't come back, like, we've seen the article for the entire series saying Barry disappears in the crisis in 2024, and find out he never comes back, and Nora grows up without a father, and she has been coming back to the present to just interact with her father. That's just what she wants to do. She just wants to know her father, and I thought that was an interesting reveal. And at first, because obviously Barry disappears and she doesn't get to know him, she is more, she seems to be closer to Barry. Like, she seems to, want to, interact with Barry more than she wants to interact with Iris. And you don't really think much of it at first. At first, it's kind of like, all right, well, she never grew up. She didn't grow up with Barry there. So obviously she's going to be, at first wanting to, just hang out with Barry and get to know him because she's probably lived her whole life with Iris. But then you find out after a while that the real reason that she's kind of acting kind of like cold to Iris is because she found out that Iris in the future put a power dampener in her that, dampened her speedster powers, and so she found out about that and got mad at Iris, and so, because of that whole thing, she's not really too fond of Iris now. So, she's really fond of Barry because she never got to know him, and she's really not fond of Iris because she lied to her entire life. And so, eventually, that gets resolved, and she kind of realizes that Iris probably had a good reason to do it, and she didn't do it out of, trying to hurt her. She did it out of love, out of trying to protect her. And so I thought that was interesting. Then, of course, as the season goes on, we find out that she's working with Eobard Thawne in the future. Or kind of like not really like working with him, more just kind of being like a pawn in his big plan this season. Of course, she doesn't know she's a pawn, as pawns in people's plans usually don't know they're pawns. She just thinks he's working with him, he's helping her take down the villain in the present, and, she doesn't think he has any malicious intentions. But she's hiding this from everybody else, because obviously they're going to get mad if they find out that she's working with the villain who killed Barry's mother, who is, pretty much Barry's worst enemy. If they find out she's working with him, they're gonna get mad. And of course, eventually they do find out. Sherlock Wells, our new Harrison Wells this season, which I'll get to in a second, he reveals to the team that she's working with Eobard Thawne, and they get mad. Barry takes her to the future and tells her not to come back. She finds a way back using Eobard Thawne's negative speed force, which I thought that was an interesting concept. The negative speed force. Somehow Eobard Thawne created his own speed force, his own negative speed force. Thought that was a cool concept. So she uses that to go back in time undetected, because if she used the normal speed force, Barry will be able to detect her and know she's coming back. So she goes back to the present, and at first Barry's like, okay, you could come home, you could stay here, but you have to stop working with Thawne. And she gets mad and starts doing some bad stuff. But then Barry realizes that he may not trust Thawne. Thawne killed his mother. He's not going to go as far as to trust him, but he trusts Nora. And he trusts that if she thinks that Thawne is good now that he changed, then maybe he did, and, he loves his daughter, and so he doesn't want to, push her away just because she's working with somebody, his worst enemy. Like, he loves his daughter, and he wants her in his life, and so he lets her stay, even though she's working with Thawne, and trusts her that Thawne may have actually changed and may actually care about her, and apologizes. But of course, we eventually find out Dawn actually has a whole plan that he's doing, and he doesn't actually care about Nora. He's just has his own plan to escape from prison, but we'll get to that later. And now I'll move on to talking about Ralph this season. And I definitely think he was a lot better this season than last season. I enjoyed his character more because, whereas last season you had to have him have the character arc where he went from being this kind of annoying jerk to a hero. Here, he's already went through that character arc, and he's just a hero now, and so he's much more tolerable this season. Just being a hero, being on the team, being friends with everyone on the team now. I think he worked a lot better this season because we already knew his character. He already went through the character arc. We didn't have to, deal with annoying Ralph for, a few episodes at the beginning before he got his character arc. I definitely think I liked his character a lot better this season, and him kind of having a bit of a conflict with Sherlock Wells, because Sherlock Wells comes in as a detective, and he's also a detective, and so they kind of butt heads a few times, with, them both being detectives, and I thought that there was some funny stuff from that. I thought that was very interesting. And also the Book of Ralph, where he's helping Cisco first get over Gypsy, and then getting a new girlfriend, and I thought that was pretty hilarious. So, yeah. I definitely enjoyed his character a lot more this season than I did last season, mostly because he'd already went through his character arc, so inherently he's a lot better of a character since he's, again, went through the character arc of becoming a better character. So, yeah, I really enjoyed his character this season. I think there was some really cool stuff with him. But moving on to the Flash's new suit this season, and everybody has complained about it, and yeah, I definitely agree. Pretty much from the neck down, it's pretty good, but just the mask part, the cowl part, whatever it is, like, the chin strap is the problem. Like, it doesn't have any chin strap thing. It's just open here, and it just looks really weird and goofy, and it just... There's like some angles where I think it looks good, but other angles where you're just like, that does not look good at all. So, yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of his suit this season, as many people are not as well, so it's cool that they did the whole ring thing this season. They did the Flash ring. That was a nice touch, because that's the whole thing with the comics. He has the ring that, has a suit in it somehow, and he, comes out and he's able to get it on. So that part was cool with the Flash ring, but, just the chin strap, the lack of a chin strap was just really weird. So I'm hoping, and I think he does get a new suit next season, so, and I think it has a chin strap again, so I'm excited to see what that looks like, and if it looks better or worse than this. I honestly, it could look worse. So, yeah. So, again, not the biggest fan of the suit. I think from the neck down, it's not bad, but just the mask with the lack of a chin strap is just really weird. But moving on to our new Harrison Wells this season, Sherlock Wells. Sherlock Holmes meets Harrison Wells, and it was hilarious. I really enjoyed that. Again, just seeing this actor playing so many different versions of Harrison Wells from various Earths, and having them all be completely different, having them all have, certain things about them that, if they're not completely different, they have little quirks about them that make them different. Of course, obviously Sherlock Wells is very different from the others, so yeah. I really enjoyed his character. Um, it's always cool seeing, other versions of Harrison Wells, seeing this actor play other versions, and make them different. That's always fun to see, and I really enjoyed this version. It's cool seeing him being this Sherlock Holmes type character, but he's Sherlock Wells. That was fun, and like having to correct people the entire season with them saying it wrong. They call him Sherlock, and he's like, no, it's Sherlock. That was hilarious. Yeah, and throughout the season, he's helping the team fight Cicada, but he's also investigating Nora because he doesn't really trust her. He knows something's up. He kind of suspects that she's working for someone, and he finds out that the person she's working for is Thawne, and as I said before, he reveals it to the team, and then you get the whole thing where Barry gets mad and takes her to the future and leaves her there and stuff, and all of that. And so I thought that was interesting, having that underlying thing that he's kind of hiding from the team, that he's investigating Nora until he can figure out what's actually happening. I thought that was cool. I really enjoyed this version of Wells. Again, it's cool to see other versions of Harrison Wells and seeing like the love story he had with I guess the woman who's a doppelganger of his other ex-wives. The doppelganger from Earth 1 of other women he's been married to from other Earths that have all been doppelgangers of the same woman. That was really hilarious. And so he finds the woman again on Earth 1, and they have a nice love story. It seems like this is finally going to be the one that works for him. So, yeah. I thought that was cool to see, and I really enjoyed Sherlock Wells. I think he was a very nice addition to this season. So, yeah. That was great. But moving on to the continuation of the big reveal last season that Killer Frost has always been a part of Caitlin, even as a kid. And so we continue that storyline here, and eventually she finds out that her father is still alive, and she finds him, and at first it's like this nice thing, like, oh, she's reunited with her father, but then you find out that this isn't actually her father. This is her father's version of Killer Frost. He also has a Killer Frost persona. You find out that, he was making himself look like he was all normal, but in fact this was the Killer Frost version of him, and he had ulterior motives with what he was having Caitlin do to help him, and so I thought that was cool to have that big reveal, and finding out that he tried to do the same thing with Caitlin when she was little, and that's how Killer Frost was created, and so I thought that was an interesting big reveal. And then as the season goes on, he returns and captures Caitlin and her mother, and tries to give her mother a Killer Frost persona also. And so Caitlin obviously doesn't want that, so she goes up against her father as Killer Frost. We get a Killer Frost versus Killer Frost battle here. I half expected Frozen to show up, like, where is my super suit? So yeah, that was cool to see Killer Frost versus another version of Killer Frost. I think they call him Icicle, actually. Seeing Killer Frost versus Icicle, two people with frost powers going up against each other. That was cool, and eventually get to this moment where her father's about to kill her, and her father ends up, her real father ends up being able to fight off his Icicle persona and goes back to normal, but then he ends up being killed by Cicada. But Caitlin's able to save her mother, but then we find out the big reveal. She tests her mother for dark matter, for metahuman gene or whatever, and uh, at first she's like, oh, the the tube didn't turn white, so there's nothing, you're not a metahuman. But then they leave the room and you see it turns white, so her mother also has a Killer Frost persona, and we'll see that next season. That's really cool. No pun intended. Anyway, though, now I'm going to move on and talk about, we obviously get new metas this season for Flash to fight, and these new metas were created from the satellite that Flash and XS, Barry Nora, destroyed last season. It had all the dark matter on it, and that created new metahumans and meta tech, that's a cool new concept. Objects that have meta powers. I thought that was a really interesting new concept this season. We get this girl who has this phone that's meta tech, and she's, writes news articles, and what she writes happens. She's able to make what she writes actually happen in real life. So that was a cool concept. And then, of course, Cicada, his dagger, is metatech. It's infused with dark matter, giving it certain powers. And so, it has the ability to take away surrounding metahumans' powers, and he's able to, kind of summon it like Mjolnir. And so that was cool. And it's cool that, they used something that happened last season as a way to, create new threats this season. I think the show always does a good job at, having things happen that set up things in the future, having the events of one season flow into and cause the events of the following season, and it just kind of goes like that. There's never a moment where you're like, oh, why is this villain just showing up now? It's always like, no, this villain, the reason they're here now is because of the events of last season. They couldn't do anything. They, maybe it's they didn't exist until then. Like Cicada, he wasn't created, he didn't get powers until last season, until the satellite was destroyed and he got hit with part of the satellite and his niece went into a coma and he got the dagger. He couldn't be a villain until that happened. They do that very well with Zoom, with the whole singularity thing. Zoom couldn't be a villain until the singularity happened. He didn't know about other Earths, or he couldn't go to Earth 1 until the singularity happened. They have the events of last season cause the events of the next season. So I think they did a really good job doing that here. And I'll talk about Cicada in more depth in a second. But now I want to talk about Cisco. And for a portion of the season, he loses the ability to vibe. And I thought that was very interesting, being able to just see Cisco just be able to, have to figure out how to help the team just as himself. Not as Vibe, just as Cisco. I thought that was really interesting. Of course, eventually he's able to get his vibes back, but because of this experience of losing his vibes, he realizes that he kind of liked things better not as Vibe. He liked things better just being Cisco, and this motivates him to create a metahuman cure, which I thought that was an interesting storyline here, the metahuman cure, and there's kind of like a debate about it, whether or not it should exist, and they decide that they're not going to ever force the cure on somebody. They're just, I think they said a really good line, when Cisco and Caitlin are talking about it. Cisco says this really good line where he's like, they're not creating a cure, they're creating a choice. And so, they're creating the choice for if somebody doesn't want to be a metahuman anymore. They can take this cure and their powers are going to be gone. And they've seen through, we've seen throughout the show a lot of people who probably would have loved to have taken this. I think they give the example of the guy who released nuclear energy all around him last season. Like, yeah, he's somebody who would probably like to go back to normal, who would like to not have those powers anymore. And so I think that was really cool to see, like, them creating this metahuman cure for the metahumans who have undesirable powers, who have powers that maybe they can't control, that powers that, hurt people around them, that maybe they just want to go back to normal. They have that choice now. Take the cure. I thought that was a really interesting storyline here. And of course, at the end of the season, Cisco takes the cure, decides he just wants to go back to just being Cisco. He doesn't want to be Vibe anymore. And he takes the cure. I think that moment was very well done. I think, it was this big moment, and they treated it like that. They treated it as this big moment. I think they did a really good job with it. But I'll get to that when I talk about the finale. But for now, I want to move on to one episode that I really enjoyed from this season, which is Cause and XS, where Nora keeps failing to save people from Cicada and starts going back in time and does this time loop thing where each time she tries to do stuff differently to save someone, but each time she fails to do so and then goes back again, and we get this kind of Groundhog Day scenario. At the same time as somebody gets captured by Cicada, Cisco is going on a date with this girl Camilla, which I thought their relationship was very well done this season, but he's going on this date with her, and he keeps messing it up each time, and it was fun to see, like, how he would mess it up every time, what he would do, that you'd be like, no, don't do that. No, don't, like he's trying to dress up as her ex-boyfriends, which is like, why are you doing that? Like, they're ex-boyfriends of her for a reason. Like, what? But he's like, oh, that's the kind of guy she's into, so he tries to act like her ex-boyfriends, and that works just as well as you'd think it would, very terribly. And he keeps messing it up every single time, and because he has his vibes, he starts to notice something's weird. He starts to get vibes of the other times that he's messed up the dates, and eventually the team figures out that Nora has been doing this time loop, and Cisco is able to realize that he just needs to be himself on the date, and in the final loop of the timeline, he's able to successfully have a good date with Camilla, and Team Flash is able to save everybody from Cicada. Nobody dies, and so, yeah, I really liked this episode. Of course, I'm a sucker for these time loop type things. I really enjoy just like messing with time in movies and shows. I think that's always a cool concept. So, I love this. I love the movie Groundhog Day, and so this kind of gave those same kind of vibes to it. So, I really enjoyed this episode. And this is kind of like the stuff I enjoy from this show, is having fun with the premise of it, having fun things with this idea of speedsters who were able to mess with time and stuff, and having fun with that. That's always great. We also get an episode where we get King Shark versus Grodd. Kind of reminded me of Godzilla versus Kong a bit, even though this came first. That was really cool. I mean, of course, like, this is a TV show on a TV show budget, so the CGI didn't look great, but it was still fun to see King Shark versus Grodd, a giant shark versus a giant gorilla fighting each other in a city. That's always cool to see. And so, and it's cool, like, that was kind of referenced at the beginning of the season. Nora referenced that. And I think the first episode, she mentions that King Shark fights Gorilla Grodd. That's in the Flash Museum in the future. And she mentions that, and so it's cool we get to see it here. And then another episode I enjoyed was Godspeed, I think it was called, where we get to see Nora's origin story, and how similar that was to Barry's origin story. Of course, the main difference here is that Barry got his powers, got struck by lightning and obtained powers, whereas Nora unlocked powers that had been, dampened by a power dampener that Iris had put in her when she was little, and, lied to her about her entire life. But, besides that, most of it is the same with, her being late to work, and then, finding out about her powers, and not being able to use them well at first, and, there's a lot of similar stuff that they have happened here that's very clearly referencing stuff that happened in the pilot episode of the show when Barry's, first gets his powers and is figuring it all out. So yeah, I really like that episode, and seeing Godspeed, which I think he ends up being a villain in season 7 of The Flash, so that's cool to see him here, and I guess he becomes something bigger. People have said he's not really that great of a villain later, but that's cool nonetheless that we see him here and he shows up later. So I'm excited to see what happens later, how he shows up, what the whole thing with that is, why people say it's terrible. I'm excited to see what happens down the line on the show with that. And yeah, those are just a few episodes I really enjoyed from this season. But moving on to our main villain of the season, Cicada. As I mentioned, he got his powers from the satellite being destroyed last season, and he got his dagger as a part of it, and it's infused with dark matter and gives him certain powers. And his whole thing is he's going to destroy metahumans. And yeah, I'm gonna admit, I like the idea of him, but he really wasn't that great of a villain. I think once, he took the metahuman cure, and then his niece from the future showed up, and she started being Cicada, I think she worked much better as Cicada. I think she had better, motivations, and she just did the villain thing better than he did. It just seemed like he was trying too hard. He was all all the metahumans will die. And it's what? What the heck was that? That's just such a generic villain thing to say. I'm going to kill all the metahumans. Can you try to say it less generic than that? That was just awful. I think I laughed out loud when I saw that, just what is happening there? That is just the most generic thing ever. That is, we're not even trying there. So, I definitely think when he was Cicada, he didn't work that well. He just seemed way too generic, way too just villain. You need to have a little bit more to him than just, he's the villain, he's going to kill all the metahumans. No, we need to, a little bit more, they give him, the backstory, they give him motivation, but it's just, I think it's just the way he portrayed it just didn't work. I feel like this actor was just trying way too hard to be a villain, and it's just, I think he worked better as just being Grace's uncle and, being this good guy, not being the villain, being somebody who's trying to help her. I think he worked better as that, not as the villain. So, I think once they switched over to having Grace from the future be Cicada, be the new Cicada, I think she worked a lot better as Cicada. Just she had much better motivation. Much, she portrayed it better. She wasn't so I'm going to destroy all the metahumans. Like she did it. She did it way better. And maybe they did that purposefully. Like maybe they rewrote it throughout the season. Like maybe, no, once they started to see people's reception of Cicada, they may have realized, oh yeah, this isn't working. So maybe they kind of wrote that in as the last minute, like, oh yeah, let's have his Grace from the future. Let's have his niece from the future come and be Cicada now. I think that's probably what happened. I don't think that they started out with the plan of having him, take the cure and turn good and having future Grace come back. I think it started out as he was going to be the villain of the season throughout the entire thing, but they realized he was way too generic, so they brought Grace from the future. And so, so I think once they got Grace from the future, it worked a lot more, and you could kind of see why she would become a villain. You could see there was a lot of terrible stuff that happened throughout her life. Like first, her parents are killed, seemingly by a metahuman, and yeah, she a metahuman caused their death, but it wasn't a malicious thing. It was an accident, and so. First her parents die, and she has to stay with her uncle, and then she ends up being in a coma, and I'm guessing once she wakes up, her uncle is dead. That's what I assume probably happened. I think, he probably died before she woke up from the coma. So she wakes up, her uncle's dead, she's lost everything, and it makes sense she'd go in this downward spiral to become this villain Cicada trying to destroy all metahumans. So, yeah, that makes a lot more sense for a motivation to become a villain than, when her uncle became a villain, just from her going into a coma. It's not really clear how he comes to the conclusion that he needs to kill all metahumans because Grace went into a coma. It's not really clear how he goes that psycho. It seems too quick, whereas for Grace, you see, it makes sense. There was a lot that happened in a very short amount of time in her life. She went into a coma, wakes up, more stuff happened, and you could see how she would become a villain a lot more than her uncle becoming a villain. But I think I'll move on from that. I've been talking about this for a while. I think Grace was a lot better as Cicada than her uncle was. But I think now I'll move on to talking about the finale of this season. And similarly to the finale of Arrow Season 7, this was also a pretty generic finale. They just defeat Cicada, and they defeat Dawn, and the season ends. And they have a big moment at the end that sets up Crisis on Infinite Earths, but it's mostly they defeat the villain, and that's pretty much it. So they defeat Cicada by destroying the dagger. At first, they are hesitant to. Ralph stops them from destroying the dagger the first time because he realizes that Dawn's plan is for them to destroy the dagger because the dagger is what is keeping him in prison in the future. And so because of the time travel rules of this season, if they destroy the dagger in the present, it will disappear in the future, and Dawn will be able to escape. Not sure if that logic fits with everything else we've seen in the show. I think it fits with some stuff and not others, but we'll go with it. They destroy the dagger here. It disappears in the future. And so Ralph finds out that's their plan. He jumps in front of the mirror gun when they're trying to destroy the dagger the first time and stops them from doing it. And so they decide they're going to find a different way to stop Cicada. They decide to give young Grace the cure, the metahuman cure. And of course, since they're like, oh, we can't force the cure on anybody, we have to give them the choice. And so Nora has to go into Grace's mind, because that connection that was created earlier in the season when she went into her mind before. I thought that was an interesting concept. I like situations where like the hero and the villain are connected in some way with their minds. Like they do this with Harry and Voldemort and Harry Potter series, and they have this with Rey and Kylo Ren in the sequel trilogy of Star Wars. I guess they also have it with Luke and Darth Vader. And so I like these situations where the hero has a connection with the villain, like their minds are linked somehow. I like those types of situations, so it's cool that happens here. And so Nora goes into Grace's mind and convinces her to take the cure. I kind of feel like in this situation, maybe just give it to her, like, he's in a coma anyway. I don't know. It seems to me like you could just give her the cure. She doesn't really want to be a metahuman anyway, so I think she'd be happy. But they're like, oh, take the cure. Your future self is going to destroy everybody. You need to take the cure now. And so she decides to take the cure. I don't know why it took so much convincing for her. Like, she didn't want to be a metahuman anyway. Like, why wouldn't she just be like, oh, I'll take the cure? Like, I don't really understand why it took so much convincing, but she ends up being convinced. So she takes the cure, but it doesn't work to defeat Cicada, so they have to destroy the dagger anyway, releasing Thawne from prison. And we see in the future, when they destroy the dagger, in the future, the dagger disappears. Thawne is able to get his powers back, and we have this really cool moment where he takes out a bunch of guards. I think that was a really cool Thawne moment, really cool reverse flash moment. So, yeah, that was cool. So he takes out a bunch of guards and is about to escape and get his reverse flash suit back on. But then you see time reverses and Barry and Nora show up in the future, and they end up running around the city fighting Thawne. And then the rest of Team Flash show up, and we get this cool moment where get to see everybody, the entirety of Team Flash going up, beating up Thawne. That was really fun to see. It was cool to see, like, for the first time, everybody having powers and going up against Thawne, because previously, we've only seen Barry be able to go up against Thawne. Like, previously when we've seen Thawne, Barry was the only one with powers. Now, for the first time, we get to see everybody going up against Thawne. All the characters, Cisco has Vibe, Caitlin has Killer Frost, Ralph wasn't even there before, Ralph has Elongated Man, all going up against Reverse Flash. That was really fun to see. And then we find out this new timeline is settling in, and that is causing Nora to disappear from existence. And they try to save her, and in doing so, they have to let Reverse Flash free. So he goes off, and they try to save her by going into the negative Speed Force, but to do that, Nora would have to, would have to go really dark, would have to give in to all the darkness, and she doesn't want to do that. So she ends up sacrificing herself and just disappears. And so, then we go into wrapping up the season. We find out Joe gets promoted to captain of CCPD. Caitlin gets this new, I assume it's a new Killer Frost costume from Cisco. Cisco, as I mentioned before, takes the metahuman cure, wants to just live a normal life and, just have his normal relationship with Camilla, not have to, have these two lives that he's living, just be Cisco, not have to worry about being Vibe also. So he takes the cure, and I think, as I mentioned before, they just do a really good job with that moment of having this big moment and really treating it as such. Treating it as this big moment where Cisco gives up his powers, decides he is going to stop being Vibe. He's going to take the cure and give up his powers and just live his normal life. I think they just did a really good job with that moment. And then we see Barry and Iris are coping with Nora's disappearance, Nora's death, and they end up seeing this message that she left, very similar to the message Barry left for her in the future. They see this message Nora left for them, basically, saying her last, final words to them if she dies in the mission, which she does. Saying how great it's been with them for this entire season, and I thought that was really well done. Again, it's it's very reminiscent of Barry's message he left for Nora in the future. So I thought that was good. And then we get to the final moment of the season, and this may seem like a much smaller ending than other seasons have had, but at the same time, it's a pretty big moment where you see this article that we've seen throughout the show. Flash disappears in a crisis. And the date on that article has always been 2024. I don't know the actual month or day or whatever, but it always said 2024. And then we see it changes to 2019. And so this is obviously set up for Crisis on Infinite Earths, showing that the crisis has moved up in time. And Barry's going to disappear in a much shorter amount of time. He's going to disappear in just a few months instead of a few years. Instead of 5 years from now, it's a few months from now. Or, well, now it's 2 years ago. So, yeah. 2019, seeing 2019 on something now in 2021 is a little bit nostalgic, since that was the last year before, and so, it's nostalgic to kind of see that, like, 2019, I'm sure in 2019, that's like, oh, that's later this year, and now it's like, oh, wow, that was some fun times. It's cool seeing that happen. It's cool seeing them set up Crisis on Infinite Earths. Obviously, Arrow Season 7 ended with some setup for it also, and this does it too. I think that's really cool that they're really doing a lot of setup for this, and I'm very excited to see what this big crossover event, Crisis on Infinite Earths, is actually, what actually happens in it. Does Barry actually disappear, or is he able to find a way to change the timeline, change the future, and not disappear? I mean, obviously, he's not going to disappear because there's the rest of Season 6 and Season 7, but, it's cool, that thought of, like, what is he going to do? I can't wait to see what happens there, how he gets out of this. I'm excited, and I think there's going to be some really cool stuff going forward in this next season of Flash, this next crossover. I'm very excited to see what happens next. But anyway, those are my thoughts on Flash Season 5. I think it was definitely not as bad as people say, but that could also just because I was able to binge watch it and not have to go week by week. But still, I don't think it was as bad as people say. I think there was some really cool stuff in it, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Anyway though, please comment below your thoughts on Season 5 of The Flash, and remember to give this video a like, subscribing to the channel, and maybe check out some of my other videos. And with that said, that's a wrap.